This is episode 57 of a series where we examine the cut content, design, and development of Fallout New Vegas. Southwest of Prim, you'll come across Mesquite Mountain's crater, a dangerous and irradiated area overrun by feral ghouls. There's a secondary location here called Hells Motel, and inside this shack, there's a dead NPC named Dr. Watson. The environment suggests that he was killed by his malfunctioning Mr. Handy, but the game files tell a much different story, one where his death was yet another casualty of FNV's accelerated development. Watson was made using a generic doctor template from Fallout 3, but it was altered in ways that suggest he was originally meant to be alive. He was added to the Ghoul faction, which makes sense considering the area outside the motel is surrounded by feral ghouls. He was also altered to sell chems, something the template doesn't do. Dr. Watson is also linked to an unused vendor container in the vendor chest cell, and it suggests that his name was originally Doctor Canton. Dr. Canton has some generic unrecorded lines like, "Alright, here's your money, what is this place?" and "Alright, fix me." His dialogue is numbered 0 through 8, and 4 of these lines were mysteriously deleted. It's completely unknown what was meant for Dr. Canton beyond selling medical supplies, healing the player, and perhaps offering a safe place to rest in a dangerous area. It seems that after he was cut, his name was changed, he was altered to spawn dead, and his Mr. Handy was made hostile in an attempt to salvage Hells Motel. A patrol route was meant to run from Mojave Outpost all the way to Good Springs, but it seems to only be half complete and is never used by any NPCs. It's unknown what its purpose was, but perhaps merchant caravans would have used it to travel between these locations after the player made the road safe enough to travel. If so, this likely would have been achieved by killing the fire ants outside Mojave Outpost and taking care of the powder gangers at the prison. In the final game, there are no traveling merchants along this route. It's certainly possible these markers were intended for something else entirely though. Mojave Outpost went through other cuts in development too. This screen capture from the making of documentary shows an earlier version of the outpost. The trucks from the final game are missing, and there's a toll booth that was later cut. The ruins seen on the right side of the screen were moved out of bounds beyond the gate. There's a large number of sit and lean markers, so many that it suggests there were more NPCs here at one point. Perhaps these would have been merchant caravans or travelers. Either would have been a nice touch, given that the I-15 is supposedly the main route between California and the city of New Vegas. Way back during my interview with area designer J.R. Vosvik, he mentioned there were more broken down cars outside the outpost. These were deleted for performance concerns, but thankfully for us, modder Ludo restored these in his mod Mojave Outpost Car Apocalypse Uncut. Near Deadwind Cavern, there's a metro tunnel that runs into a mountain. There's strangely no tunnel on the other side of the mountain or anywhere around it though. There is another lone metro tunnel outside Nipton, but it's very far away and its exit is implied to be outside the playable area. It seems there was meant to be another tunnel aligned with the one near Deadwind Cavern, and perhaps it would have appeared near the area Prim Pass, a path that connects Prim and Novak. Presumably there were meant to be additional railroad tracks along with the tunnel, but they're missing as well. If the other tunnel had been added in, perhaps the stations would have had an interior that could have been used as a shortcut through the mountains. The tracks that come out of the tunnel near Deadwind Cavern run past Novak and then just stop without warning outside Helios 1. I suspect this set of tracks was once intended to continue much further across the map though. There's a strange series of connected markers that leads from Lieutenant Hayes' tent at Prim all the way to Nipton Rest Road Stop. A long time ago, we talked about how Mayor Stein of Nipton and his cut prostitutes were once going to appear here dead, as the exterior cell is called Mayor Stein, and there are 3 lottery tickets placed underground. If the player elects Prim Slim or Mayors as sheriff, Lieutenant Hayes and Sergeant McGee travel to Camp Forlorn Hope. Perhaps they once stopped here on their way there and commented on the mayor's fate. No AI package uses this in the final game though, so it's difficult to say what it was meant for. Many of the game's cut lines were made very early in development. Lieutenant Hayes has an empty dialogue topic called NCR Activities, which you presumably could have asked him about. Sergeant McGee also has an empty line called Prim Sitrep. Mayors at NCR Correctional Facility has an empty player line that reads, "Have you considered surrendering?" This could refer to several things potentially, so it's unknown what's going on with this line. He has another cut player line as well, "I'd like to enter the prison now." This suggests that he had Dawes' job of guarding the entrance to the prison in early drafts of the area. There's cut lines for asking the townspeople in Prim about the town and about the services available in Prim. Actually being able to speak to ambient NPCs would have been a nice touch, even if it was just to ask basic questions about the area. There's an empty dialogue topic called Hidden Valley Password Seductive, which might be a cut Black Widow or confirmed Bachelor line. There's also some test dialogue that reads, "This is a null line no one will ever see. Oh, how wrong you were, random developer."
Let's see. Physically, you're fine. Emotionally, well, I'm not the right kind of doctor for that.
Ada Strauss is a doctor found in Novak, and she strangely has 2 merchant containers. One merchant package is underground in Novak, and another unused one can be found in Prim beneath the gas station. This suggests that Ada was once going to appear in Prim rather than Novak, and she would have added a lot to the area. In the final game, there's no doctor found at Prim. This is also interesting because the vast majority of vendor containers aren't placed in the game world. As far as I know, most vendor chests are contained in the normally inaccessible vendor chest cell. This is a small room that uses the Lucky 38 suite wall texture. There is also an NPC named Suite Upgrade, which was used to test the player suite upgrades. Out of bounds, there's a large number of floating chests, which act as the inventory for most core game traders. Novak and Prim were 2 of the first areas worked on, so it seems that Ada's vendor chests were added to both areas before the vendor chest cell had even been created. Several other characters went through name changes as well. Lieutenant Hayes was apparently called Corporal Hayes originally, as that's his name in the game files. Sergeant McGee was originally Lance Corporal McGee, a military position that no NCR NPCs hold in New Vegas. Tabitha was named Bridget at one point, as her glasses are called Bridget's glasses. Trudy was originally named Ruby, according to some of her early lines. Name changes aren't an uncommon occurrence in game development, but I find even minor changes like this interesting. Trudy also has lines for the player trespassing, which presumably were meant to be used if the player went behind the bar in the saloon, or maybe if they broke into her house. In fact, most of the characters in Goodsprings have lines for the player trespassing, but owned areas for the player to trespass in were never set up, so none of these lines can ever be heard. It's possible this was an oversight, or it's possible trespassing was cut in Goodsprings deliberately, since it's the starting area.
I'm warning you. Keep your distance. Shoot!
Stop! Don't! Stay away!
Get the fuck out of here. Get out, now. You don't belong here. Go.
Hey, no trespassing. Find someplace else to be. You're not supposed to be here.
Stay back. Don't get any closer. Not another step.
During the quest Boulder City Showdown, the Great Khans who help Benny are hiding out in the ruins of Boulder City, where they've taken 2 NCR soldiers hostage. Depending on the player's dialogue choices with Lieutenant Monroe, the Great Khans will kill the hostages when detecting the player. One of them has a line about executing the hostages, but it never plays in the final game.
Say goodbye to the hostage, fucker.
This quest apparently had an issue where the NCR soldiers would come back to life after being killed, as a note in the hostage script mentions, updating variable to prevent zombie. Yes, zombie. We've covered a lot of script notes in this series, but there's still a few more worth mentioning. The script that handles Arcade's companion quest has a note that reads, "Arcade is at the Battle of Hoover Dam. Pew pew." The script for Ravens is called Blackbird Singing, which I'm fairly certain is a reference to the song Blackbird by the Beatles. It goes on to say, "Fly, little one, fly." The code that handles the player killing Caesar reads, "Caesar's bed and throne are now property of the player. Hail Courier." Hoover Dam's code has some great ones too, like "Unleash the Securitrons, armies will clash," and "After killing or driving off General Oliver, the game ends, and there is much rejoicing." In another instance, a designer left a note about why another designer's code wouldn't work and referenced the online guide. They had to learn how to use the engine somehow, but it's pretty crazy they were using Bethesda's online GEC tutorial, as the guide didn't cover many of the engine's functions or capabilities. And who could forget the classic McGee is Sheriff. Sheriff McGee. There's some interesting NPCs linked to Vault 11, called Vault 11 Survivor, Vault 11 Survivors, and Roy Gottlieb. At first look, these appear to be unused, as they aren't placed anywhere in the game world, but they are still used technically. Much of Vault 11's story is told through holotapes, and all dialogue, even dialogue from holotapes, must be linked to an NPC to play, so these characters were created for that purpose. At the end of Vault 11, you're treated to a creepy slideshow, and it's one of my favorite moments in FNV. Like all of the slideshows in Vault 3, these slides are one long reel that slowly clips up through the vault ceiling. I love seeing how iconic moments like this are handled behind the scenes. New Vegas has a wide assortment of low-tech weapons, everything from switchblades to samurai swords, but a notable exception are bows and arrows, which would have been a great addition for the Legion or Tribals. Further, bows were present in previous Bethesda games like Oblivion, so it definitely would have been possible. Josh Sawyer revealed that the team actually considered them and why they were cut. It didn't have anything to do with the Elder Scrolls specifically. We weren't sure what assets or functionality was present to support bows, and adding a new animation stance is a pretty time-consuming undertaking. There seemed to be enough R&D required up front that I didn't think it was worth pursuing. There's a cell that was used to test traps in New Vegas named Test Cell for Traps. There are several traps from Vault 3 here that aren't used, like the ductwork trap, the pitching machine trap, the Brahmin corpse trap, and the baby carriage trap. There are 4 swinging traps here, and only one of the 4 is used outside this cell, and it's only ever used twice. The mailbox bomb can only be found once outside this cell, near the Monte Carlo Suites, which is too bad because it's a great trap. There is also a crafting bench here. This was most likely used to test crafting mechanics, but I wonder if they considered making a trap version of the crafting table, something that would have been a nice touch. Gas grenades aren't cut and were never intended for the player, but they're interesting nonetheless. They're only used in game once, during the quest Birds of a Feather, when Gloria uses it against some Legion soldiers. The weapon itself has a smoke effect, but doesn't actually do anything else. I always thought these Legion soldiers were dead, but they're scripted to take 10,000 fatigue damage during this scene and are knocked out. That means you can wait a while, return to the area, they'll regain consciousness, and then be killed by NCR soldiers. On the Veteran Ranger combat armor, there's a symbol on the chest that's difficult to see because of the duster jacket. Earlier this week, Josh Sawyer confirmed this was an Easter egg that's been hiding in plain sight since the game's release. I don't know if it was on the in-game armor, because the duster covers most of the chest, but it was obviously a part of the key art. One of the artists at the company that textured the high-res model, not us, included it as a Hellboy BPRD homage of some sort. It was not a part of Wesley Burt's original concept art that I remember, but I may be wrong. By extracting the texture it uses, you can see this reference is actually in the final game, it just can't be seen normally. The artillery guns at Nellis Air Force Base have an unused firing animation. Presumably this was meant to be used during the player's first trip to Nellis. The artillery guns that can use this animation are placed so far away, the player would never be able to see them while they were being fired on, and this is potentially why it was cut. Perhaps they were intended for another scene, but either way, it's yet another cool idea that was never implemented. These changes would have made FNV into an even better game. Ultimately though, all of this was left on the cutting room floor.